Welcome back to the SEC Dairy Program. Today we will talk about farm economics, and this is our last chapter of the whole dairy program. Today we look at the business of the farming side. You see the picture on the right, the dairy farmer at the bottom, responsible to make sure his breeding program is okay and he gets the best genetics. He's responsible for nutrition, reproduction, healthcare. He controls everything, and through the nutrition, we see the results in reproduction, milk production, and animal health. Together, that will have a big impact on rentability and profitability of the farm. So this complex business is what he's running, and let's see how we can run it in the best way. A farmer, of course, wants to have a nice income from his farm so he can live reasonably comfortable. But in addition to that, he have other decisions to make. Farmers often are avoiding risks. They don't want to take risks. And as a farm advisor, don't try new things with farmers and expect them to jump at it. They will ask you, have you tried it before? Does it really work? Can you have proof of that? Farmers may say, okay, the size of my farm is okay. I continue and I keep it in good shape. Other farmers say, no, I have 100 cows now, but I want to move to 200 or 300. I have sons that want to make a living, so maybe someday the farm should be big enough to support two families. So all possibilities are there, and the farmer has to make his choices and looking ahead in the longer future. It's long-term decisions that he has to make. Now, if you talk about business, we talk about the economic factors. Labor, of course, is one major factor, and that's not only the labor we hire to do the business, but also our own work and that of our family. We should calculate it at the market level, at a market price, because then we know, are we earning a similar income from our work as we could if we had a job somewhere else. The same for the money we invest. If we must calculate our own money at a certain interest rate and money that we have to borrow, and which will probably cost even more than our own money. Land, same story. Owned land and hired land both have a cost and should have a revenue that is comparable to what you do with it. What we consume ourselves is part of basically of our income and our revenue, so we must also calculate it at a realistic price, the price that we can sell it for. Now, if we want to have a future, then if we look the money that comes in, the difference between sales and cost, if that's enough to make a living but there's no surplus, we're going to find ourselves in problems, because someday the tractor should be renewed, someday we want to invest in other building, or we have to expand, or we have to do other things, repay our loans. So there must always be enough money coming in, not only to cover the actual cost, but also to grow and to reinvest. And that's what you have to keep in mind when you look at the figures. Now, talking about farm business, we cannot escape to mention farm recording, as we do in basically every session we have together. We need not only records on the performance of the herd in all aspects, but also we have to see, are we efficient in our business? Is it the best way to do it, or can we be more efficient by making changes? And the future may change also. Everything is changing, prices differ, products differ. 20 years ago, nobody thought about mobile phones and computers, and now we all use them all the time. So all these things have to be taken in account. And what we want to know is, okay, how I did it the last 2 months. Does that work? The changes I made then, for instance, in the ration, because I thought it was better, did it give me more milk? So feedback on a short notice is important to see what you're doing and what changes are still needed. Nobody likes a lot of paperwork, so the minimum to meet the needs is the starting point, but still the needs are quite substantial because we need financial records, performance records, our breeding records for the future herd, and then what goes in and out of the farm and what we spend on machine maintenance and all these other things. So all in all, it is a bit of work to do. You can do it manually. I have nice record books, and that was done for a long time. Now we have computer-based programs, and that makes it a lot easier. You fill it in, but you can play with the figures much more. What we will talk about today mainly is about gross margins. Gross margins, that's the difference between revenue and variable cost. Now, variable cost are those costs that you can easily allocate to an activity. Here you see an enterprise. We'll talk about what is an enterprise very soon. If I have feed cost for 10 cows or I have feed cost for 20 cows, that is easily attributed. More cows, more feed. More animals, more other costs as well, and more income too. So crops, variable cost for crops is the seed, the fertilizers, etc. And for livestock, the whole list that you see here, also variable cost. These are the costs we will work with. And then we talk about enterprise performance. You see 3 pictures: sheep farming, cattle farming, crop farming. These are all different enterprises, different activities within the same total business. Each of them has its own cost, each of them has its own revenue, and we can compare what is more profitable and what is less attractive. For each enterprise, we can see, can we make improvements? Do I want to continue with this business? Should I change this one? Should I stop with sheep and continue in cattle? Or should I stop with milk and move to beef? All these possibilities are there, as long as we know for each activity what we do. This is an example of how you calculate a gross margin. In this one for milk, we have the milk sales. How much did we sell at what price? The livestock sales, culled animals, young bulls, etc. All the meat sales. And then we have our list of variable costs. We add them up. We have a total cost. And we have a total revenue, and the difference is our gross margin. Now, this is for the total farm. We can split it up in the different enterprises, because for feed cost, you can say, okay, I produce my own forage, and I use 20 hectares to produce forage. That forage I sell to the dairy farm. It's an input for the dairy farm and an output for the crop production. And then on my land, I can say, okay, now I've grown forage on 20 hectares. What if I had grown tomatoes or whatever, something else, would my revenue from land still be the same? So these are the options we can look at, and we can split it in smaller enterprises up to the level that we say, well, this is enough. Here in this picture, you see a cow standing in something what they call a barn. And if we talk about changes needed, well, definitely for this cow and this way of dairy farming, change is needed. We need to look at our performance of the cows, and we can compare that to the region. If in a region that you live, there is Holstein or Montbéliard or Simmental or whatever, and their average production is 20 liters per day, and you're stuck at 15, you have to ask yourself, hey, why is this? Why am I below the regional average? Or why am I higher than the regional average? What am I doing so well? So this is one thing, you compare. And then you look, how can I increase my profit? Increase the gross margin. If I make less cost with the same revenues, my gross margin will increase. If I produce more with the same cost, my gross margin will also increase. So that's one way of doing it. The other one is, okay, I'll stop this business and shift to another one. Revenues, well, we look at the revenue per cow. My cows have a genetic potential for 30 liters and I'm producing 25. Am I satisfied? The milk quality and the milk price, is that acceptable? Do I get paid for milk quality? And what efforts do I have to make to improve quality? And can I improve the quality if it's worth the effort? So that's another step. Herd composition, sales, culling. Am I replacing so many cows? Is a culling rate of 35% necessary? And what's the cause of culling rate? Is it health? Is it my efforts to have a better herd? Do I keep more calves than I need? Do I indeed make a choice in sires for milk and beef, and what is then most efficient? So all these issues affect revenues. Here again, the choice of breed. Is it suitable for your farm and management system? I put it there because I've seen many places where very high genetically, potentially Holstein cows, heifers were imported, distributed, and then the farmer, he didn't know how to manage this cow. For him, a crossbred animal or an easier to manage cow would be far more beneficial than having this super cow which is not managed well. So you have to see what kind of animal fits your farm conditions. Health and comfort. Well, if your conditions for housing the animals are not properly and the animal cannot behave the way it should and it's restricted in many ways, it will not reach its genetic potential. And the same with nutrition. Feeding must be adequate, not only for the cows, but also for the young stock and the calves. Calving intervals, we will talk about that very soon. Long calving intervals are a headache because they cost you money. And can we improve it, and what is wrong? We're still on the revenue side. If there is a great demand for milk, dairy plants are looking for milk, so they buy. But the moment that supply and demand are more in balance, the dairy factory will go to those farms that provide the best quality and sell larger volumes because it's cheaper for them and better. They can make more products with added value. So make sure you always are at the top with quality and try to get the right volumes to get good quality, because then you stay longer in business. Surplus heifers, culled animals, normally is about 8 to 10% of the total farm income. So depending on your farm management and your system, you should also be seeing this kind of result. If it's less or more, you have to wonder why. Well, we just mentioned culling because of health problems. It doesn't help farm progress. It means you need more replacement heifers, which makes it more expensive, and you make less genetic progress on your farm. You cannot really reach the targets that you want to. So this is something which affects profit in a substantial way. Reproductive performance. Now we move a little bit to the more specific issues and see what happens and how we can measure it. We see plenty of calves nicely in the dry straw, feeling quite comfortable here. There are many ways to measure reproductive performance. When we talked about breeding, we already discussed part of that. Here we still have a list: calving interval, calving index, pregnancy rates, culling rates, service, conception, heat detection, days dry. All of them are used to measure performance in reproduction. Some are more useful than others. To start with, before you can measure anything at all, you have to say, okay, what is my target? Can I remain within this 370 to 400 day calving interval? And should I aim for 370 when my herd is producing a bit less? Can I allow a 400 day calving interval when I have a very high yielding herd? So that's the decision you take, and then you see how you get there. Without herd health program, you don't have all the information you need. When do you start breeding your cows? Not too early, not too late, because then when you start too early, you can inseminate more times without having any effect. How do you do your heat detection? How efficient is that? When do you do your pregnancy check? Do you wait too long and then find out that she's not pregnant when you thought she was? Again, a month's lost, 2 months lost, you never know. So all these issues that you see here, you have to pay attention to be able to be efficient. Now we all know calving interval, from one calving to the other calving. And one of the first things we ask, okay, what's the calving interval on this farm? And then they tell you, okay, 360 days, 380 days, 400 days. It gives us some indication. And it's easy to understand what's happening. But we only know after the next calving what the calving interval was. So for a short, quick answer on what's happening today on the farm, calving interval doesn't tell us enough. And another disadvantage is that calving intervals only take place when there is another calf born. But if you have sold 10 cows because you never got them pregnant, you will not see that in the calving intervals. So it may be a bit misleading as well. And if you have 100 cows and 5 of them were very late, you inseminated 5 times and then they didn't get pregnant, and then finally after 550 days they give birth, then your average is quite negatively influenced, even though 90% of your herd did quite nicely. So you have to look at the details to know exactly what a calving interval tells you. Now, then you have a pregnancy rate, an overall pregnancy rate. That is how many inseminations do I need? If I have 60% pregnancy rate, as is in the table, then from 100 cows inseminated, 60 are pregnant. The remaining 40 I have to inseminate again. The remaining 16 I have to inseminate again, until I finally get on my fifth insemination. I still have 3 left and 1 of them pregnant. So I used 165 inseminations and I have 99 calves. When my pregnancy rate is lower, say 45, then I have to inseminate 211 times to get 96 calves. So this shows that the number of inseminations is a cost factor, and not only has effect on the direct cost of buying more semen and having less calves, but you can imagine that if it is all later, the whole system will be a little bit distorted. Again, what does this tell us? Of course, we need to get it as good as possible, and we see that the target of 55% is not bad as a pregnancy rate. But we still don't know what's wrong in detail. We only know that something is not the way it should be. So more investigation is needed. The same for our culling rates. We see the effect of culling rates, 25%, 30, 40%. It influences the age of cows, because the 2 in the second column is the rearing period. And with 25% culling, that means from 4 cows we cull 1. So every cow should remain 4 years in the herd, making it 6 years. If our culling rate goes up, the cows stay shorter in the herd, so our age on the farm of cows goes down, and it goes down to 4.5 years total lifetime when the culling rate is 40%, and then the rearing period is almost the same length as the productive period. Now, we also see that it has an effect on the number of calves we need and we have to replace all these animals. So later we have a table where we see the effect of all these differences. Culling rate is the starting point, because we still don't know the reason for cutting. Yeah, it can be for reasons that the price of slaughtered animals, beef, is very high and compensates for the rearing cost, and that we want a very fast genetic progress. Still, it would not be my choice, but it would be an explanation. So we have to see what the reasons are. And here we can also say the failure to conceive culling rate, because that excludes the other reasons like mastitis and hoof problems. Now we're getting a little bit more short-term views. Calving to first service interval. When do we do the first insemination? If we do it too early, then the cow may not be ready to conceive. So it may that we get lower pregnancy rates just because of starting a bit too early. And if we wait too long, we also lose benefits from the other side, longer dry periods, less milk, etc. So we want to have a nice calving interval or service interval that is reasonable. Preferably, we see here 60 to 70 days. Ranges from 40 days also exist, which is far too early, but we don't want to be over the 70, 80 days because then we definitely lose money. So also, again, within the herd, there may be strong variations. So averages only give part of the picture. Here, calving to conception. Well, that is quite an interesting one. Conception within 95 days is very good. And then we know we waited long enough because we didn't start too early. The cow, we didn't miss too many heats, and the cow was in good shape to conceive. So our feeding and our management is not so bad either. So calving to conception is a very interesting one. And again, the average is good. Look if the individual cows don't vary too much in their performance either. Heat detection. In breeding topic, we talked a lot about heat detection and how easy it is to miss heats and how you can improve on that. Here again, a short summary about the difference in heat detection, 60% or 40%. It is an important part to avoid missed heats and to have a good administration, that you know where to look for and whether the heats are correct. This is a big table with many figures which are a little bit hard to see in such time. The formula is in the second column, so you know where the data comes from. You can calculate it yourself, and you can fill in your own data and make your own calculation according to the formula and see what it brings to you. This is for a farm with 20 cows, where calving to conception varies from 87 to 247 days, which is a big difference, of course. If conception is later, the calving interval will also be the same difference. So we add this 270 days of pregnancy period to the conception period, and then we get that. And then we start calculating with dry days, cows in lactation, etc. That's quite a lot of calculations that follow. In the end, we see the revenues and how all this has affected the income on the farm. The total revenues, and this was in dinars because these calculations were based on actual situation in Algeria. $7,000 to $4,700. So that means that's per cow. If we look at the total times 20, then it adds even more up. So revenues go down on all sides, and that makes a big difference just by having longer calving intervals and lower conception rates. Go through this table at ease. look at each of the lines, how they are calculated and where the logic is, and then see in your situation where you can make changes. Here again, the length of the lactation period, which is again related to longer calving intervals, because then you continue longer milking. Now, the first 100 days of lactation, the cow produces already 45% of its total yield in a 305-day usual lactation, and then 33% in the second 100 days and 22% in the third 100 days, and only 11% in the 100 days that would follow until 400 days. You see the graph underneath the tables with the lactation curves. And first lactation is more level, but later the peak is higher and the drop is stronger. So there the effect is even higher than in the beginning. Now, if we have a farm, 10,000 liter per cow, 8, 6, and 4,000. So big difference in farm levels. But the effect is more or less the same for each farm and each farm level. If we have a good calving interval and a lactation period of 305 days, we have an average of 33 liters per day on this 10,000 kilo farm. If we continue 100 days longer, our average drops to 27.5, because these last 100 days have a big impact on the average, on the total average. With 8,000 liters, we drop from 26 to 22, and with 6,000 we go from almost 20 to 16.5, etc. So if you can make your calving interval or your conception faster, then you remain in this higher peak production levels of the first few hundred days, and then slowly go down to the last 300 and then dry your cows and start a new lactations 50, 60 days later. Nutrition, of course, is a major factor. Feed costs 60 to 70% of our total cost. So that's a lot. And what can we do to control feed costs? Well, there is a whole list that you see. Waste, rations, etc. All parts that we have to look at. And we'll look at them a little bit more detail on this page. Storage, transport, and when feeding. During storage, our silage quality goes down. When we feed, we have losses. When we transport, we may lose parts. So everywhere we have a little bit of loss. And then we want the cows not to eat till the last bite, but we want to see that there is something left over, so they are all satisfied, and we can start fresh feeding again. If the rations are not good, either. We see that back in the cows, in production, in condition, in performance, in other things. So the rations are important to have them adjusted to the animal and the stage of lactation and the age groups, etc. If we group animals, keep them a little bit same age group, same level, there is less competition and they all do better. And you can feed them more correct, more in line with what they need. Additives are expensive and they can be very helpful if you give them at the right moment and for the right purpose. If you just feed them throughout the year, you certainly can save a lot of money. Also, we have to look at the feed cost. Where do we buy it? If we buy it, what feed supplier can we work with? Is he reliable? Is what's on the label, is that what he gives? Can we replace one feed for another, which is more attractive? Should we mix our own feeds? What is available on the market? What's the feeding value? And compared to the price. All these things help to make cost savings in feed. Now another one here is the stage of cutting. If we look at this Sudan hybrids, they grow very tall, and we can cut them when they're 2 meters. We can cut them at 80 centimeters or 1 meter or somewhere in between. Of course, if we cut early, we have a lower yield, but we have higher feeding value per kilo dry matter. So to find the right balance is what we are aiming for. If I can cut 2 or 3 times when I cut at 80 centimeters, then I have 3 times 6,000 kilo dry matter per hectare instead of 18,000 from one cut. So the same volume, but if you look at the feeding difference, I have 3 times the calories. It's 25,000 instead of the 15,000, and the same for the protein. So where do I get the highest feeding value? At what stage of maturity? And how does that balance with the yields that I need to feed my cows? This one we've probably showed before, and otherwise it's good to see it again. Old hay, strong. Dry matter intake, well, 9.5 is maybe even on a positive side for a cow of, say, 600 kilos. And young temperate grass, a dry matter intake of 14. So if it's tasty, if it's good quality, the cow eats a lot more, and it eats more of a high value product. So the energy from the one product or the other product can vary from 9 to 23 and everything in that range. Now just imagine how much difference that makes to the need for feeding concentrates in addition to reach a certain milk yield. So the best quality forage is always the one that gives you the most and the best results. Here, another example of Algeria, where we compared the different rations, and you see we had far more rations, but here we have the short version. The first ration we had oats hay and natural hay, lower quality, and for 20 liters of milk we needed 8 kilos concentrate to do that, and that gave a total cost of 488 dinar per cow per day. When we fed alfalfa hay and maize silage, both of reasonable quality, we only had to feed less than 2 kilo of concentrate, and our cost per day was 340 dinars. So we saved 149, and the gross margin increased quite substantially between one and the other. Now, this is kind of calculation you can make yourself in the same way. What do I need to feed from what you have in this way? What if I make different choices? How does that compare? So take this as an example and then play with it with your own currency and the own feeds that you have in your area. Here still some additional remarks related to that table. The one is that in the second ration, the dry matter intake to reach these 20 liters was lower than what a cow can eat. So I could even feed more concentrate to that cow and it still would not be a problem. And then it would even produce more milk and the gross margin would be even higher. So the effect is more than what you just saw on the table. This is about the last part of our economics, our calfrearing. And then if we talk about this, especially the age at first calving plays an important role. If we want our calves to be ready for calving at 2 years age, 24, 25 months, we have to inseminate at about 45 months, 14 to 15 months. So at that stage, they should reach 55-60% of their mature weight. And in the table, you see the last column, the weight gain per day that is needed to reach all those targets. And the weight gains in the first year are higher than those of the second year. Then we slow down a bit because we don't want the animals to become too fat. But in the first year, we want the body to develop and the bones to develop. So there, our feeding system is quite different. Now, if we aim for 2 years, we should follow these weight gains, otherwise we can't reach it. We can also say, okay, let them calve a bit later, and then maybe I will spend less money per day in feeding, and what few months more or less doesn't matter so much. Well, let's see. In this table, we have 4 growth rates, 500 grams, 600, 700, and 750 average over the total rearing period. And for each, we have calculated the feed cost. If we grow 500 grams, it would cost us so much energy per day, per animal, and it goes up from 4.6 to 5.6. And the cost, and again, it's Algerian currency, we can calculate energy will cost so much. So from 161 to 196, this is the cost per day that we need for the feeding. Then the number of days, if we wait longer and feed lower quality, we have to wait longer till we reach this 50-60% of the mature weight. So with 500 gram, it takes over 1,000 days. And with the last one, we have less than 2 years. We have 23 months to reach that target weight. So we have a feed cost, which basically is less per day, but in the total, we see that the quick feeding is cheaper than the slow feeding. And besides that, we lose milk because instead of milking from 23 months on, we only start at 35 months. So the period from 23 to 35, I'm still spending money on that animal and not gaining anything. So we lose milk production compared to the 23 months, but also the calf value goes down because otherwise our first calf would already be 1 year old or more in compared to the late calving cost. So we have calf value, milk production, and the rearing cost itself. If you add that up, you see how the difference builds up The first case 364,000, the last case 139,000 cost. And that's per heifer, and with 20 animals and 5 replacement heifers. The total picture would be what you see, 1.8 million. And then if we calculate that back to the cost per liter, per kilo of milk, 20 compared to 7.8. So this is again a table that you will have to go through all the figures and see that what the impact is and where you are yourself, at which place are you, at 23, at 25 or 29 months at the age of first calving, or somewhere in between. 35, of course, calving at 3 years, that's really late. And you see, well, it's not as attractive as you may think it is. Okay. This was what I wanted to tell you about gross margins and the economics of farming. And this is also what I was telling about the total story in 10 chapters on dairy farming and profitable dairy farming. Keep your cows healthy and they will keep you happy. Make everything as good as you can. You'll stay in business and you'll have a better profit and your cows will last longer. And still, this is maybe the 4th time you see this cow, my favorite, because she's going to be 10 years and still producing, and she produced more than 100,000 liters in her lifetime already. She's a super cow, and that's what I wish for all of you. Thank you very much for listening, and all the best in your work. Bye-bye.